These are cards you should never draft in Marvel superheroes. Now, never is a bit of a strong word, but these cards are underpowered, and unless you have a very specific reason to play them, you should be leaving them on the sidelines because they are going to weaken your decks and make it less likely that you will win games. First up is Invisible Woman Sue Storm. For 4 and a white, you get a 2/5 human hero with lifelink, and whenever you put one or more +1/+1 counters on one or more other heroes you control, you may create a 0/4 colorless wall creature token with Defender. Now, Invisible Woman Sue Storm is quite simply not enough stats for the cost. 5 mana for a 2/5 is too small. By the time you play it, it's not going to really ever have any attacks that it can make, so the lifelink gets blunted in a pretty significant way, and the benefit of making 0/4s isn't really that substantial to make up for the fact that you just played a 5 mana 2/5. It's just so easy to get this double blocked down if it does try to attack. It doesn't even block things that profitably because thanks to the power-up mechanic, even creatures like 4/4s that it could block are often going to grow out of range, and there's just so many cards at the 5 mana slot that can do really, really powerful things that just putting this card in your deck is a liability and is going to weaken your deck significantly. So unless you have the Fantastic Four all uncommons combo across 4 colors, you shouldn't be putting Invisible Woman Sue Storm into your deck. Next is Death to Our Enemies. For 2 and a red, you get an enchantment plan that says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a tapped treasure token and put a plan counter on this enchantment. When the 4th plan counter is put on this enchantment, sacrifice it. When you do, it deals 7 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. So eventually you're generally going to get a 2-for-1 with this card, but the problem is if you play it on turn 3, you need to then cast 4 non-creature spells before it does anything, which is really, really tricky because tapped treasures aren't really going to be contributing a whole lot to the game. So you put yourself in this huge deficit and the payoff is a 2-for-1. And there's plenty of ways to get 2-for-1s while also affecting the board state, which means Death to Our Enemies is just not going to be doing what you needed to do. And if you top deck it later in the game, once you've already deployed your non-creatures, it's almost a blank because you're going to then have to top deck further non-creature spells for it to do anything. This is a card you should just avoid playing. Next is Rewrite History, another plan. For 2 into blue, you get an enchantment plan that says whenever 1 or more creatures you control become tapped, draw a card, then discard a card and put a plan counter on this enchantment. When the 4th plan counter is put on this enchantment, sacrifice it. When you do, return up to 2 target instant and or sorcery cards from your graveyard to your hand. So it's getting you some looting, it's getting you some card advantage eventually, but the problem is, once again, it's too slow, too finicky, requires too much from you. So first of all, you have to have creatures getting tapped, which means you're being able to attack, or you have some creatures with tap abilities, or something like that. And you're getting to loot, which is somewhat helpful, and then eventually you get a 2-for-1. But the problem is, once again, if you draw this when you have already deployed all your cards, it doesn't really do anything. If you draw this card and you don't have profitable attacks or something that can tap itself, you don't really get to do anything. And even if you do have something that can tap itself, it takes 4 turns before you get those 2 instants and sorceries back. Plenty of time for your opponent to disrupt your plan, and you are falling behind when you play this, which makes it less likely you'll be able to attack because you spent 3 mana and didn't affect the board state. So overall, Rewrite History, another one of these plans that you should be avoiding. Next up is Hire a Crew. For 2 into red, you get an instant that says create a 2/1 black villain creature token with menace. Then creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. There's not really a whole lot of support for a go wide type deck where just giving all the creatures +1/+0 would be super helpful. And even then, +1/+0 for 3 mana is not the biggest stats boost and isn't going to significantly affect the game and make crazy trades happen a lot of the time. You would need things to line up very specifically where like your 2/2 gets blocked by their 2/3, your 3/3 gets blocked by their 4/4, and even then the creatures are still trading off, but you do end up with this 2/1 villain with menace, which is just too small ball. So kind of both modes of this card, like the +1/+0 doesn't do enough. The fact you're getting a 2/1 for 3 mana at instant speed isn't going to be doing enough. And overall, both sides of this card, there's just not really a home for it, and it just isn't the card you're going to be interested in playing because it's just too inefficient, requires too much of you, and only has like a very niche specific spot where it would actually be useful, and that spot doesn't come up in the games nearly often enough. It doesn't come up very often at all, in fact, and so it's just not going to be a card that you're going to want to be interested in. Next up is Super Speed, another card that gives +1/+0. It's a single red mana for an enchantment. Aura with Flash, it enchants the creature, and when this aura enters, enchanted creature gains first strike until end of turn, and the enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has haste. +1/+0 just isn't a giant stats boost, and this card is just very marginal impact. It requires you to have like a profitable attack where the creatures are going to trade off organically, like 2/2s being blocked by a 2/2, or like one more, like a 2/2 gets blocked by a 3/3. It's just doesn't happen as often, and combat tricks are already very risky because playing them into open mana opens you up to getting 2-for-1, and this one doesn't have quite enough use cases where if your opponent points a burn spell at your creature or something, Super Speed can't buff its stats to protect it. Like where a lot of combat tricks have this kind of mode where they can pseudo protect your creature from removal or things like that. Super speed doesn't really do that, and even though it just costs a single mana, it's just too low impact to be worth a slot in your deck, because +1/+0 and first strike, and even sometimes when you get haste and that matters, that's not going to be worth the times where you just play this, have the card in your hand and just not doing enough to have a significant impact on the game, when there's so many good cards these days to play instead that actually can just do something. Like even a random creature is going to have a better impact on the game than this pretty much every single time. Next up is Too Evil to Stay Dead. For 2 into black, you get a sorcery with teamwork of 4, and you choose target creature card in your graveyard with mana value 4 or less. If this spell was cast using teamwork, instead choose target creature card in your graveyard, return the chosen card to the battlefield. Now the thing is when you're spending 3 mana and you have the potential to get a 4-drop back from your graveyard, that feels like it could be pretty reasonable, but it's just really hard to fill your graveyard, and you'd rather just play a card that you can always play on turn 3 versus you have this in your opening hand, you don't have a 3-drop to play, you fall behind on board, eventually you get to play something and eventually you get to get it back, but you just end up falling behind for no real reason when you could just play like even a marginal 3-drop and be much happier in a lot of situations. By the time you could use the teamwork to get back any creature from your graveyard, not only is it you might not have any creature to get back from your graveyard, but you also might not have 4 power worth of creatures in play, and you could just put another big creature in your deck if that's what you cared about getting from Too Evil to Stay Dead. So overall, both kind of modes on this card aren't really doing enough to make Too Evil to Stay Dead like a worthwhile card to include, because it just does so little if you have it in your opening hand. You just need a creature to play, where the downside of that is not worth the upside of maybe getting a little bit of selection on which 3-drop or 4-drop or whatever you get back from your graveyard, or sometimes getting back something bigger. Just overall, it's too low impact in the situations where it matters, where you're actually casting it, and the fact that you don't really get to do anything with it in the early turns is a huge liability. Next up is Call Damage Control. For 1 and a green, it's a sorcery that says choose up to 2. Return those cards from your graveyard to your hand. Target artifact card, target creature card, target enchantment card, target land card. Pretty much creature is the one that you're going to be getting almost every time when you cast this card, but there's just not a lot of ways for artifacts or enchantments or lands to find their way into your graveyard, and 2 mana to just bring back a creature to your hand is just not a good card. You would just rather play another creature instead of playing this, which might not even have it. Like, you can't cast this again in the early turns, and getting back like your best creature from your graveyard for 2 mana to then replay it isn't even always going to be that great. The fact that you're just not reliably getting a 2-for-1 with this card is just a huge downside, and means that Damage Control is a card you're not going to be interested in playing. Next up is Decoy Ploy, a kind of similar card to Damage Control. It's 1 and a black for an instant. Choose one or both. Return target villain card from your graveyard to your hand. Return target hero card from your graveyard to your hand. These sorts of cards that can get back cards from your graveyard, theoretically this could get you a 2-for-1, but again, you have to have a pretty specific scenario for that to work out. There's not all that many like decks that are playing tons of villains and tons of heroes, so you might have some of both, but only in the extreme late game would you actually get a 2-for-1 for this, and 2 mana to just get back 1 creature from your graveyard isn't going to be great. And again, in the early turns of the game, you need cards that are going to affect the game meaningfully, and like even a card draw spell that just draws you cards can be helpful, because that helps you hit land drops and stuff. Decoy Ploy just sits in your hand doing nothing in the early turns until eventually one of your cards dies, and even then it might not be a card that you even care about getting back. Like if your random 3-drop villain dies and all you have is Decoy Ploy in your hand, I guess you're going to spend it to get it back, but like it's just not going to be a high impact play because you just got back a random 3-drop. You just don't have, it's not like you're just going to always have a really good card in your graveyard to get back, and you're not going to be always getting a 2-for-1 with this. A lot of the time it does nothing for quite some time and then gets back something marginal, and you're just not very happy with the card. So overall, Decoy Ploy, another card to avoid. Next up is Hex Magic, another kind of weird card draw effect that is best left on the sidelines. It's 2 and a red for a sorcery with Arcane, which is not relevant in any way in this set. Exile all the cards from your hand, then draw that many cards. Until the end of your next turn, you may play cards exiled this way. So basically, if you have like 3 cards in your hand when you play Hex Magic, you get to exile all of them, and then you draw 3 new cards, but you can play the cards you just exiled and until the end of your next turn. And so you can kind of like get a little bit of card advantage by like playing the cards from exile if you can like deploy as many of those as possible. The problem is if you're in top deck mode and you have a Hex Magic, it just doesn't do anything. Like you have like 1 card in your hand, you spend 3 mana and you basically draw like 1 card maybe, or you end up in the early turns where you use your Hex Magic, but you can't deploy enough of the cards that you've exiled to actually make it relevant. And overall, you end up in this weird spot where it's not a great top deck. It's not a card you really want to play in the early turns because you kind of have to like get rid of your entire hand. You don't have like flexibility in the cards you get rid of. And it's just overall, there's way better ways to get card advantage than this kind of weird finicky card that sometimes doesn't even do what you want. So just avoid this card and you'll be pretty happy that you leave this one on the sidelines. And then finally, we have Super Strength. For 4 under green, you get an enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +4/+4 and has trample and ward 1. So this just turns any of your creatures into kind of a huge problem for your opponent. But the thing is these sorts of cards are just real liabilities that you just don't have to put into your deck. If you try to play this card and your opponent has a kill spell in response, you get super blown out because you not only get 2 for 1, but you also spent 5 mana and got 2 for 1. So your opponent killed your creature and got the value from this. Even if you play this and maybe get 1 hit in, if your opponent then untaps and uses a kill spell, you also feel really bad. And generally, you would just rather play like a 5-drop that stands on its own and just does its thing, because that card doesn't open you up to all of the downsides of Super Strength. Also, if you don't have a creature in play, you end up in really bad shape. You never really want to run this out into open mana because it just leaves you so vulnerable to getting blown out in response. And generally, you just don't want to introduce that kind of risk with your 5-drops when you could just put like a random 5-mana clunky creature in your deck that's going to maybe have a random power-up ability you can spend later. There's just so many better things to do with your mana when you have 5 mana in modern era of limited, that you don't have to risk it all on a Super Strength on your creature when you could just play a more reliable card that doesn't have the downside of needing to have a creature in play, doesn't get as blown out by removal, and overall just is a more effective card. Even though the times when Super Strength goes off, you might feel like, oh, this is pretty good, there is just so many downsides to this sort of card, and those downsides mean this is a card you should not really ever want to be playing. That's going to do it for this video, though. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to the end, leave hashtag 10traps in the comments section down below, because now you know about these cards and you'll be avoiding them so you can build better decks. That's going to do it for this one, though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.